Hey everybody, welcome back to Contest Prep University. Joe Klemczewski with Adam Atkinson. Going to keep rolling along in our contest day and peak week management series, talking about the pump up process. I get this question all the time, Adam, and I often send people some links to what we've already done, but I thought it'd be a good time to reboot, especially in this series, a very granular, comprehensive look at what that process is like. And to some of my most recent clients who have competed, it's always something difficult to kick off the conversation with, but it's very dynamic. First of all, you have to be watching, the flow of the show. You have to try to ascertain some kind of ETA for your stage appearance based on how many competitors are in each class and division prior to you, how expediters are managing it, because especially if you are being coached and you're trying to relay information back and forth to a competitor or a coach. I mean, you're doing things that are probably within 10 to 15 minutes of potential change. I want you to start drinking this at this point, eat this here, start pumping up at that point, and it's all contingent upon a certain amount of distance between you and being on stage. And I don't want to make it sound like it's down to the second, but so many times a competitor might, relay information to me like, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to be on stage," and we go through some instructions, and then 2 hours later they're still waiting, or vice versa. Oh, I got plenty of time. Then I hear from them 10 minutes later. Oh my gosh, they lined us up, and I'm already done. Didn't even have a chance to pump up. So let's start going through this bit by bit. We have already talked about water management, carbohydrate management, the minerals. So, assuming you've got that baseline of the entire week where you want it, tell me how you start getting clients ready for that lead up to the stage.
Yeah, so biggest thing is predicting the show timing, and that usually starts at athlete check-ins, athlete meeting. Is it a large show or not? Do they have any pro categories? Are they doing routines in the prejudging round, or maybe some shows have saved them to finals for me here and there. So that's always surprising when that happens. But being prepared for pretty much anything. What do the classes look like before you? Are there a lot of crossovers? Are they doing masters first? Or are they doing open first? If they do the open first and your client's in the open, there won't be any crossovers at that time. So by looking at the order, I think some people just see the order and it's the order, but that means a lot to me as a coach. Okay, these masters people are they've already done routines. So in the open might start going really fast. Sometimes they'll even post the amount of athletes in the show, which can be really helpful because then you can see how many crossovers there are. But we're usually not that lucky. So we're usually just taking that initial blunt of information and just trying to time that pump up best for the client.
Mhm. And let's go from because again, I don't want to completely just rehash everything we described in our first couple episodes on water, carbs, etc. But just for the pump up process, when when a client asks you, when should I pump up and how much should I do and so forth. Let's get to the technical parts of how much to do in a few minutes. But like, when do you want them backstage, taking off the sweats and just starting the process? How much time do you tell them to allocate?
Yeah, I usually want them backstage about 45 minutes to an hour before, just in case anything runs fast, or so they can be aware if there's an intermission that's being held, and just kind of have your headphones out and your ears open at that time.
Mhm. And I'm gonna come back to some nuance, and I will probably overlap some of our previous episodes, but um, when the sweats come off and it's time to start warming up from any type of hydration, mineral, or carbohydrate management, uh, including the actual act of pumping up. Let's start going through piece by piece, step by step, what an Adam Atkinson client would encounter.
Yeah, so typically we've done our test pump at this point. We know, we've either adjusted things to help them pump up better. So I want a lot of communication at that point. But usually glaze is when we kind of turn on what we're doing next. So um, usually while my clients are getting glazed, if the pump up meal is necessary, we'll go ahead and insert that around while they're getting glazed. So then they can just have something to do while they're in line. And then after that glaze, we should be kind of looking at where they at in the lineup and how soon should we really turn this on. From that point, I usually tell them water's unlimited. If you're pumping up and you're thirsty, that's, you know, we either may be behind, but I'm not concerned about you overhydrating at that point. So if you're thirsty, definitely feel free to drink. And then I usually tell them to really turn that pump on about two classes before you. So that's when you know, it's going to be hard to over pump at that point unless it's a really long class. And I just tell them to kind of keep an eye on the stage and just make sure you're not out of breath when you go on stage. I think that's the biggest mistake anyone can make is, pumping up so rapidly that you can't hold your core in for your poses because you're out of breath.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Let's go back through one step at a time because I agree with the 45 minutes to an hour. If you have started to discern the flow of the contest and you're pretty aware of when you think you're going to be on. I know backstage expediters and promoters sometimes have a different process for when they let people, get officially into the backstage pump up area. But however close you can get, just so you're within earshot of instructions, and at least you're starting to get your gear around your food, your water, whatever pump up implements you have, with you. But I similarly, if somebody's going to have any kind of food at that point, it's 30 to 45 minutes prior to the point they plan on being on stage, because I want some digestion occurring along with that pumping. Again, you have a certain amount of time for that to get into your stomach, small intestines start to get absorption. And remember, you are not at that point synthesizing any glucose into glycogen. You're simply sparing muscle glycogen and starting that process hitting in that direction biologically. Glucose entering the bloodstream, having a place to go, a directed target, which would be muscle tissue. So again, all geared toward just sparing muscle glycogen. Interesting what you said about the hydration. Uh, that's tough for a client to hear. Unlimited, drink what you want. They want no, no, no. Tell me how many ounces, when, etc. And the one time I gave an instruction because this client was in Australia, we could not communicate at the right time. I just said, here's what you have to know. Here's the list of things. I got to go to bed. I'll wake up in 5 or 6 hours and maybe we'll have a chance, to catch up again. But let's just remember this. If you're looking flat, if you're not feeling that vascularity, if you're not getting the same kind of muscle dynamic that you usually get, then you need more water. That is the one variable. So I wake up and he had won his class at big national pro qualifying show. He's the lightweight and he just looked like a brick wall. I mean, I have photos of this because it's such a good teaching point in PowerPoints. I'm like, holy shit, what did you do? You look phenomenal. He said, I drank an entire gallon of water backstage, like pumping up in a 30-minute process. So luckily it wasn't all in his bladder, while he was on stage, but that just shows you cannot spill over from water intake if you have the right mineral composition and carbohydrate management technique in place. It's just going to go to the muscle where it needs, and then you're going to excrete it through, your urinary tract. But let's go back a little bit to one of those overlap points. You said, Adam, if somebody needs some food, what are some points where they may not need food? Where you say, look, we just, I had this plan. This was what we might do. We just don't need it. When might that occur?
Yeah, if the show starts like happening sooner or their class starts happening sooner, this does happen. I've had clients where, maybe a division had nobody in it, one person in it. It basically skips that block or two. Some shows will be short on men, so the men's portion can go really quick. But that would be a scenario. Maybe they just ate an hour ago. They may not need anything in the bloodstream to pump up off of.
Exactly. And I've probably mentioned this time and time again in our last 4 episodes, but truly another thing that's difficult for competitors to hear is it's not all about the carbs. It's not all about the pre-pump up food. That is not what gets you to your best on stage. It's having those constituents, those solutes heading in the right direction, and then it's the hydration and the pump up process. So just to kind of tie a bow on hydration, I know you said just drink per what you need to feel like your muscle volume is getting where it should be, and maybe even per thirst. But do you have a targeted amount? Because you could have a 100-pound female, you could have a 220-pound male. Are you allocating certain amounts per, the actual contest day?
Yeah, so usually I'll give them a water amount by a certain time, so then they're not so nuanced on like sipping a certain amount per meal. A lot of my females have makeup appointments, and that's where, timing the water can fall behind. If someone's playing with their face, they tend to drink a little bit less. So I'll usually give them a water amount, and I use that water amount for check-in time versus like a meal time. So I might say, 130 ounces of water by, 11:30, depending on what their normal water intake is. And then they'll send me pictures. That's the all water in check in. Typically, we'll do a test pump around that time as well and make sure that they're really able to achieve a pump as well.
I have a funny story that just happened yesterday. A client of mine, I've mentioned him in the past, big top pro, several Mr. Natural Olympia pro titles in different divisions. And we were doing something in the last couple of weeks, a contest, and it was a 2-day prejudging. So we had two divisions one day, another division the next day. And in the middle of that, or I should say a week after, he had a photo shoot. And he sent me these photos out of the blue. And I said, wow, like you are so full. Your quads, I've never seen them that full. These 2 or 3 pounds we've gained in the last week since the contest have really helped with fullness. He just said, no, Joe, those were stage shots, or not stage shots, but backstage shots at our last contest. And I thought, holy shit, again, like, his level of fullness was insane. And it was just the hydration because I thought on the second day, we ended up a little bit flatter because, the first day of prejudging, he had two divisions. He burned through a lot of food. I was afraid since we were already on that top end of a progressive linear load, if we went higher, we could spill him over that next day. So I was intentionally pulling back just a little bit on food. And so I thought, man, if we miss this, it's because we were a little flat. And I was insanely wrong because we caught up and then some just on hydration and of course with the appropriate amount of minerals. So let's now tackle as a way to finish up this topic, the actual pump up process. You said, don't get out of breath. That would indicate you're really doing a lot of work backstage. Maybe in my perspective, using too much muscle glycogen. You're going to go on stage, and especially if you have a longer prejudging, standing there holding your poses, you could be getting flat and then worse at the time when you need your fullness the most. So let's go through that whole starting process because everybody has questions. Should I do leg work, ab work? How do I do this or that because of the tan and the glaze? So, again, client of Adam Atkinson, what are you seeing them do backstage if you're an observer?
Yeah, so usually in their peak week document for show day, I select the muscle groups that I want them pumping up backstage. Recently, I've ran into, hypermuscular bikini competitors who maybe don't need to pump their shoulders. Potentially even in fit model too, since they don't want, you know, as much shoulder in that division. So the pump up may be dependent on their division, their individual look. So that really matters. But we definitely give them like kind of a template of like, here's the muscle groups we're hitting. I usually have them bring a band backstage just because not all shows have them. Some shows are great about having bands, but it's always great to have your own stuff because then you never have to worry about all the bands being taken. It's just the one thing that you can control is if you have your own stuff. So basically, when we're working in those practice pump ups too, we can see if maybe they neglected an area or if we're seeing an area not get full, or maybe they need more time on an area. Let's say if they need more glutes, we may teach them how to do some kickbacks with the heels on. Another thing is gluing the bikinis. Like push ups is a great exercise, but if girls are glued in, they may not be able to get down to the floor without messing that up. So these are things we want to consider with like the activity and what exercises we're doing.
Yeah, excellent, excellent point with the limitations based on suits and so forth. One of the things that I always consider, and I'm glad you brought this up, is the difference between the divisions. So a female who may be in a class where they're just going out for a quick T-walk or comparisons, and they're not necessarily flexing that hard on stage, I believe you can get a little fuller backstage where you need to be, muscle body part appropriate. Um, because you're not gonna then spend an extra 15 minutes on stage posing aggressively using muscle glycogen. The caution there are more for men in bodybuilding type categories where historically that promoter or that organization ends up having you on stage in a tough class for a long, long, long time. I have often told the story. One of my toughest pro shows, they didn't have weight classes, just one big open show, pro WMBF. And we were literally on stage for 45 minutes for prejudging. They took us off stage at one time, kind of a halftime, just to let us towel off and get some water. And so, again, anybody who had managed their pump up nutrition, hydration, and and warming up properly could get better and better and better and better. But those who had kind of, wasted it backstage, they did so much aggressive training, they're probably getting flatter and smoother. So, uh, very much parallel to your rule of not getting out of breath. I tell clients start early because, like your test pump, Adam, I want you to gauge with 30 minutes or so before the stage to see how you really feel, what's happening with that muscle tissue. If you need to start hydrating a little more, you can see if that helps. If that's not helping enough, maybe you need some extra mineral density with that hydration. And then maybe you start escalating to a little bit of extra glucose, a simple form of sugar. But if you go too quickly in any of those directions without enough time before the stage, you just can't catch up. So for me, I like to give the metaphor that it's literally like warming up before your workout. You're stretching, you're doing a couple sets. It's nothing heavy, nothing rapid. You do a set or two, a superset maybe. You sip some water, you take a minute in between, and you keep going. But the people who are backstage and you just see them furiously warming up, I'm afraid they're probably going to get flatter and spill over a little bit because as they're using muscle glycogen, that water is released, doesn't have anywhere to go initially. It's just out there in body spaces before it's collected into the vascular system. So let me kind of bounce it back to you just for more detail on how you like to see people pump up. You mentioned bands. What other kind of perhaps apparatus or movements do you often use?
Yeah, kickbacks are great for girls for the glutes. They can literally loop it in their heel. I recommend girls always use that gap in their heel to hold the band. I've seen too many bands flip up off the toe of the heel. I'm sure we've all seen that. So I always say that's why they wear the heels is to hold the pump up bands. So that's super helpful. Obviously, doing some lateral raises. If you don't have bands, you can have your coach or trainer push on your elbows and you can do some lateral raises that way. Some rows. So, the bands are long, so you may have to like kind of loop your hands in there and do some bent over rows. But typically, just, something for chest, something for back, something for delts if you're under in musculature. So just try to be as big and full everywhere as possible. Don't just pump up like your lagging muscle group unless you're just really asymmetrical. Maybe if you have really tiny arms, you may want to pump only arms. But for most people, you're going to do best if you like pump your chest, back, lateral delts, even arms just a little bit. And you had actually convinced me on this. I used to find it that we wouldn't pump legs for my more muscular divisions, bodybuilding, women's physique, even wellness. And I actually changed my mind on that. I think the biggest thing's fatigue mitigation. The legs can tire you out quick. It's a bigger muscle group. I'm a firm believer in posing them, but maybe doing, just some static extensions, maybe some light air squats backstage. Nothing too crazy, but just enough to get some good blood flow everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. I'll start with the legs because I'm big on, some light stretching and then like you said, some body weight squats. You can do even just standing without a band, just hamstring curls, one-legged, no weight with kind of an isometric contraction. That's more for neurological control. But as you're pumping up more of your upper body, as you said, for symmetry, completion, and so forth, you have to remember your sympathetic nervous system is coming online, and that's body wide. So even if you're not necessarily pumping up your legs hard, you're still getting blood flow increasing to musculature throughout your body. So at that time, to even just practice posing, whatever division you're in, you can sit there and you just contract your quads, however you like to make sure you're engaging your rectus femoris and so forth, and doing a quote set of those. It's not an exercise, but it's just literally flexing, relaxing. That can start sharpening up the detail because you are directing blood flow to that muscle. But then, as you said, I don't want to repeat everything about the upper body. I also love to see my clients take what they need in terms of bands. Some contests have some weights. Maybe you can use them, maybe not, dumbbells and so forth. But you got to be pretty resourceful and plan on, perhaps not having a lot of support there. Just make sure you can still get it done. But I would just reemphasize, start early, take your time, go slowly. You're not trying to create a fight or flight sympathetic response by just really driving into this, quote, workout. It's just to warm up and start the blood flowing so that by the time you walk on stage, it's truly almost a peak experience. You're getting to your best look when you walk onto the stage. You don't want that to have happened 20 minutes prior.
Right, exactly.
Anything that we missed here, Adam? Anything you can think of with all just the granular details of pumping up?
I don't think so. I think the biggest thing is, stay focused, enjoy your time with your line mate. That's a great time to meet people and just have fun, the all the work's done at that point and you know, as long as you've been in communication with your coach and things are going smooth, like very little is to change at that point.
I almost said that same thing a few minutes ago. Don't hesitate to ask another competitor to help you pump up. Like, hey, you want to do some towel rolls together back and forth, something like that, because more than likely other people could use the help as well. So awesome note to finish. All right, guys, thanks again for viewing or listening to the podcast. And those of you interested, always make sure you reach out and ask us about the D1 Club, where we get together with a $3 a month paywall to talk about these things with our group. A lot of facilitation and even private calls. We have one coming up this week on this topic. That's why I wanted to get this in Adam, so we can give even more specific instructions to our members, and they can ask more specifically to their needs. But we will see you guys next time in Contest Prep University.